Day 69 of my art development series. If this is your first day here, my name is Andrew the Wren, and I'm doing a series where I kind of document my process of growing as an artist and how I practice art. And right now we're in the middle of, by popular demand, of Anatomy Month, which means we're going to spend the whole month of January studying anatomy. And this week we started looking at the anatomy that makes up the front portion of the body, which includes the neck and the pectoral muscles, the abs, a little bit of the obliques, and really anything that's in the front of the body. And to learn anatomy, we're employing a technique called chunking, which is that we kind of take larger topics that we want to study or learn and we break them down into smaller pieces. So for example, this week we're studying the front of the torso, and then next week we'll study the back of the torso. So today what I did was a drawing where I actually kind of peeled back some of the layers on anatomy and went even more fundamental. So I started with a little lay-in of the skeleton, just kind of a block in to suggest the rib cage and the pelvis, the skull, and then the spine. And then I went ahead and put the anatomy that we've been studying so far about the torso and put it on top of this image. And this was actually like a really great exercise. If you haven't done something like this, I highly recommend it. I had done it several times in the past, but I haven't really done it very much recently. So it was nice to try and do that. It's also, in my opinion, really helpful to do it without looking at the reference or without looking at some anatomy reference and trying to see how far you can take it with imagination. And then once you've kind of hit your limit, then go back in and re-look at it and readjust and restudy what you need to. And I'm going to talk more about the drawing once we kind of switch to the time-lapse only. But before I do that, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what my approach is or what my philosophy is and what I'm trying to share during this anatomy month. So my goal with this anatomy month is actually to not teach or talk about anatomy. I think that there's actually a lot of other great content that exists that I'm going to point everyone to and that I use myself to learn anatomy. And I don't think I'm the best person to learn anatomy for artists from. I think that there's like much better resources and people that understand it much better than me. So instead, what I would rather talk about is like ways that I practice and ways that you can practice and that you can kind of experiment with and kind of adjust on your own. I'm kind of taking that approach of Bruce Lee. There's a quote that's something like, Bruce Lee's talking to someone that he's trying to mentor, and he's like, I cannot teach you anything, I can only teach you to explore yourself. And that's kind of how I feel right now. I can't teach you anatomy, but I can maybe teach you how to explore learning anatomy or how to explore something within yourself that will help you find the answers to anatomy. So in terms of how I'm thinking about this, I'm just going to break it down into like a bunch of different categories. So and exercises that go along with those categories. So the first one is this idea of like looking at resources to try and learn aspects about anatomy. And so this generally falls into two categories, which would be those that are like video resources. So a big video resource that I've been using is Stan Prokopenko's course, which is linked in the description, and I actually will link a little playlist that's solely about like the front of the torso, which are actually all videos that I watched today before I began this drawing for the day, just to kind of study again and try and re-internalize some of these things about anatomy. The second thing is looking at, rather than watched material, is either written, is like something like written material. And so I also have linked in the description is a textbook by an artist named Valerie Winslow that talks about anatomy for artists. And I have another resource that I found helpful, which is where I pulled the reference that we're drawing from today, that I've also linked in the description below. But just generally, there's so much good information out there right now that it's kind of impossible to not find like good videos and good online resources for learning anatomy. Just off the top of my head, some other great works that exist, some great references that exist. One of them is like the multiple Bridgman books that exist. So Bridgman was an artist who spent a lot of time looking at 3D construction and kind of like this idea, a little bit of mannequinization that we talked about. And he put out several books for artists on how to learn these aspects of drawing better, how to learn the 3D construction of the figure at a very high level. And in that vein, actually, Jeff Watts, who you've probably heard me mention quite a bit, who's also on YouTube, also has some books and resources that he has put out that are incredible. There's really no better time right now to learn academic art, or no better time in history than now to learn academic art. So now that I kind of talked about, these ways of studying, either watching video content or reading from textbooks or reading online content, there's also the ways that you can practice. And so the approach that I've been taking right now is what I mentioned, where I kind of started by this like very simple straight on portrait or straight on drawing of the torso, followed by a profile torso. And then you could also, if you wanted, add into that like a 45-degree torso, which is actually what I did today in this drawing. And the idea is that you want to try and do as many different positions or as many different kind of ways of studying the figure as you can. The more positions you see the anatomy in, the better you'll be able to understand how the anatomy works. When you're studying anatomy, some things that you can think about that are always going to be covered in these resources are things like the direction of the muscle fibers. So for example, on the chest, like the muscle fibers on the pectoral tend to go across the body, and that kind of gives you some information about how they sit on the body, how they move, but it can also be useful for finding like drawing rhythms and things like that. It's also important to know like where muscles connect and where they finish. So for example, the pectoral muscle is connected to that bone here, the clavicle on this side. It's connected to the sternum in the middle, and it even connects, actually, believe it or not, into the arm, and that's where you get the armpit effect, this piece here. So, understanding these kinds of things about each of the muscles will help you significantly in your drawing, because you'll be able to figure out where something begins and where something should end in any given pose. It can also be useful to do trace overs, so that's kind of what we're doing today, where I started with a skeletal structure and then I drew all the muscles over top of it. But it can also be a version where you print out a bunch of skeletons and try and draw the muscles on top of them. Or you could do the reverse, where you actually print out or look at pictures of full figures and then try and draw the muscles on top of them, and then maybe even try and draw the skeleton inside of the body and understand where it's sitting in the body. So you can kind of go both these directions. Start from the skeleton and build up to the final figure, or start with the final figure and subtract until you hit the skeleton. It's important to do these things for both like male and female figure, always beneficial. And also it's great to think about different body types. So you could have something like very lean body type, where you can see a lot of the muscles, but they're not necessarily built up, versus like a muscular body type where you see all the muscles and they are built up. Then you might have, what you might think of as like an average build, which is just somewhere in between, not fully defined muscles, but nothing is fully lost. And then you may look at like a heavier, larger body type where actually like a lot of the anatomy might be covered up in terms of like references for, a lot of people, for example, use pieces of like the abdominal muscles as references, but it might be harder to find on a heavier model. So you have to kind of think about and navigate these pieces of drawing differently. Then in addition to drawing from references, the different references that you choose matter as well, in the sense that you could be studying from, anatomy sketches like we are here, or like these are like specifically for looking at anatomy. You might be studying from the full figure, but then trying to understand better the anatomy. You could also be studying like master copies, which is to take another artist's work that you really admire and then try and study that from that, how the anatomy is, how they're using anatomy or how they're thinking about anatomy, and all these different ways. So the idea here was that I just kind of laid out like just every way that I can think of, even right now. I'm sure there's more, but these are all the different ways that I can think of about kind of studying anatomy. And for me, like the important thing is to be mindful about how you're picking your next strategy. So you need to, like, it's worthwhile to make every practice session really count. So for example, in the past 2 days, I did the front on view of the torso, and I did a profile view of the torso. So today, I knew if I was going to do another day of practice, it's not really worth going in and practicing one of those again for the sake of studying and learning something else. So I was like, okay, I'm probably going to do a 45-degree or like some kind of dynamic pose. And then I thought, okay, I don't want to do just another sketch from anatomy. I'd rather do a different exercise that can help me build up a deeper understanding of the knowledge. So I could have either picked something like I did today, where I started with the skeletal structure and then built up, or I could have started with something that was like fully built up and then kind of subtract. And as I'm doing the drawing, I'm not just trying to copy what I see. Like the point of studying anatomy is to study anatomy. So I'm really, really trying to think about how these different pieces fit together and think about things that I was talking about earlier, like the connection points, like the direction of the muscles, and how they exist in relation to other muscles. And I think that this is like really critical point when you're taking the time to actually study anatomy. So, I mentioned that I actually, before I even started drawing, I watched like 35 minutes worth of Proco videos, and took a few notes on how different things connect in the body and how they all fit together, to like kind of really, really internalize some of these ideas. So I think actually I ended up talking for much longer than I expected. I can see it's like a little over 10 minutes. So I think I'll end here. Hopefully this motivates you a little bit to study anatomy. My plan as we move forward is to go through many of those things that we just talked about and cover them on each day. We will talk again soon, and I hope this motivated you to draw today or study today.